Hey everyone, welcome back to AI Insights. I'm your host for today, Fleur Prince, and I'm together here with tech lead of Kedro, Merel Theisen. Welcome.
Hi.
And today our podcast is actually going to do an interview with Merel to get to know her more and about her expertise in AI. So, Merel, you had quite the journey. Could you tell our listeners a bit more who you are?
Of course. So my name is Merel, born and raised in the Netherlands, and this is where I did most of my studies. So I studied liberal arts and sciences in Amsterdam. It's a special undergraduate degree to get exposure to humanities, social science, and science, which was my major. And that's where I got in touch with programming and my first Hello World was written there. And I loved it so much that I realized I wanted to pursue more studies in computer science. And I went to London where I did a master's in computer science. And then I basically stayed for 10 years and have been working as a software engineer for most of those years. And now I'm finally back in the Netherlands and ready to explore the tech scene here a bit more.
Awesome. Well, already welcome back to the Netherlands. Well, my first question already falls into what inspired you like to transition from your liberal arts background to a career in software engineering and AI? Because it's quite the detour from the usual person.
It was. I think it's kind of an interesting path because I knew when I graduated from high school at the age of 18 that I liked a lot of different things. So up until 18, I basically did sciences, so mathematics, chemistry, physics, alongside of languages. So in the Netherlands, we learn a lot of languages and I basically took all of them. So I knew I had quite a broad interest. And when I was 18, I wasn't ready to let that go because I felt like, wow, I love things like mathematics and it's a very, of course, practical degree to do. And there's a lot of opportunities there. I didn't really want to already lose that arty side of things. I really liked literature and, language. So I wanted to learn more. And then I found this degree in Amsterdam. It's part of University College, and at the time it was quite a new concept. So I think now it's been around for, I think 15 years throughout the country. But at the time I was like the second or third year to graduate. And it's a special college. All courses are taught in English, which I thought, that's quite handy. And it allows students to pick courses from different fields. So anything from film history up to neuroscience with economics, social justice stuff, everything. Which also meant that when I joined, they started a course it was called Programming Your World. So I was one of the first students who actually took a coding course at the liberal arts college. And with me, a small group of other students, and throughout my studies there, they added more and more courses. It wasn't really a full-on computer science degree though, so I was kind of getting little bits of coding, a little bit of software, but it was very basic. But because, I could still graduate and I could kind of dabble in it, and I did a bit of machine learning, so it really sparked that flame. So I was quite lucky to be able to actually get a degree while still exploring what I really wanted to do. So I kind of, I wasn't too surprised I rolled into computer science because I already loved mathematics and I loved solving things. And I think at the end of the day, computing is also all about problem solving. And it is actually quite creative. So my creative side was also sparked with this.
Yeah, so I got very much triggered.
Exactly. Because I remember my first course, it was all about building things as well. So we were very free to choose whatever we wanted to do. And to me, I felt like it really connected these sides of science with more creative stuff. It's not quite literature.
Yeah.
It's also not too different. So I was quite lucky that I could try this out without having to do a full-on degree. When at 18, I just didn't really know what to do. But that definitely led me to, after the undergraduate, pursue a postgrad in computer science. And the reason why I went to London is that at the time in the United Kingdom, they had quite a free system for master degrees. So you didn't have to have like a matching undergraduate with postgraduate. Whereas in the Netherlands, they essentially told me if you want to study a master's in informatics, you have to go and do a bachelor in informatics.
Sounds like very, very familiar story.
Yes, yes, because I wasn't the only one who studied liberal arts and then went to the UK or the US to pursue a more technical field after that.
Well, that sounds so much fun. Also, sad to hear you had to move to the United Kingdom just to continue your journey. By the way, I also read your bio that you made a journey from like going from a private tutor to becoming a principal engineer at Quantum Black. I feel like that's part of the journey that ended up going further in London. Can you tell me more about that?
Of course, I think interestingly enough, I don't think I have changed that much from the person who was a private tutor. It was basically, at the time when I was 17, 18, and when I went to uni, I liked helping people studying again because I had quite a broad range of interests. I was quite, I guess a unique tutor who could help kids with more than just one course. So I taught maths to people, chemistry, but also French and ancient Greek and all that kind of fun stuff. And I feel like even though now obviously I'm not teaching people Greek anymore, as an engineer, I think you do end up working with people a lot and explaining things. So I feel like even though then I didn't know I was going to be an engineer, I did already develop that skill of explaining things and going deep into understanding why certain things work in a certain way. And the private teaching, it started as like a side job while I was at school. But then when I moved to London, I actually became a private tutor for coding as well. So I taught coding to kids from like age 7 to age 15.
Oh, that's so cool. But yeah, that also I feel kind of like ties into your coding experience turning into a principal engineer.
Yes.
And also, I think from what I read after that is that you also became a tech lead for Kedro. Can you explain how this open source Python framework is revolutionizing data and machine learning pipelines?
Absolutely. So maybe for the listeners at home, Kedro is basically an open source Python framework, which aims to helping people make it easier to transition from experimental data science projects into real production ready machine learning pipelines. And Kedro, it was basically built with really this idea that as software engineers, we could contribute something to the world of data. Also by observing that a lot of the time within companies, they don't necessarily employ all the technical profiles, right? There's a lot of places where you have maybe some data scientists, maybe some machine learning engineers. Other places you only have software engineers, but a lot of the times these technical people are then expected to do everything from more your traditional tech stack to then suddenly doing data science and exploring what you can do with AI. And we felt like, the software engineering craft as it is of course fairly old, we could say now, and maybe a bit less sexy than machine learning and data science. But it's still very relevant, and writing good code and establishing best practices within a team, building larger systems is important for the durability of your project, but also, just the robustness and the trustworthiness of any pipeline you're running. And so we developed Kedro to make it easier for people who don't have these software engineering skills from like their backgrounds, but to adopt them in their flow. Because at the end of the day, it's also, if you're a data scientist, you want to be doing the data science. And that's probably what you're best at, right? Because, you've studied that, you love modeling, and that's why you work in the job you do. You don't want to be busy writing a test setup and then writing documentation, da 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 da. So the easier we can make that, the better. And that's why we built Kedro. And I think in my view as a software engineer, it's also, I think the revolutionary part here is actually going back to the basics, like basic software engineering, because while the world of AI is exploding and there's just so much happening, it's still very important to remember that systems need to be, we need to be able to trust them. They need to be scalable. They need to be tested. It's like machine learning. Maybe it's different from, your old school software, but these principles still hold. So I think it's interesting that in a way the revolution is just bringing back something that we used to do back in the days.
I feel like that's with a lot of inventions. Like it looks super modern, but you end up still sticking to the old stuff. I know it's the same thing like with the phone. Like you now have the flip phones, for example, and you can like turn it into an iPad and stuff. Yet I still see people just like using a normal iPhone just because it's easier because it's like one screen. You can see everything on it.
Absolutely, yes.
How many users are there, by the way, now on Kedro? Is that something you can see or?
It's hard to track exactly because it's a Python package, it's a framework. We have reached over 10,000 stars on GitHub, so to us that signifies that at least we're bigger than we were. But it's hard to tell because also like Pipey downloads, they're not super accurate. But the last time we did a bit more research, I think we have at least 2,000 active individuals, part of more than 300 different companies.
Oh my God, that's so many people.
Yeah, we try our best to like advertise and grow. And yeah, we're still in growth, so that's great.
Yeah, what, by the way, drove you to jump on the Kedro project, actually?
Very quick question. So I joined Quantum Black about 6 years ago.
Yeah, by the way, could you tell people what Quantum Black actually is?
Yeah, of course. So again, listeners at home, yeah, Quantum Black, it was a startup once upon a time, and they operated in advanced analytics or AI, as we say now, to predict specifically for high competitive sports how teams could do better. And a famous project was what they did for Formula One, and that kind of caught interest of bigger companies. And McKinsey, a big consultancy, ended up buying Quantum Black. And it became their AI department. So now as an organization, we are part of the consultancy, but all the projects we do are somewhat related to advanced analytics. And, you know, it goes from anything to predicting efficiency for pharmaceutical processes to prediction in natural disaster places. As a backup engine for Quantum Black, we have Quantum Black Labs, and this is our product lab. So this is where we develop products that can aid when doing advanced analytics projects, and Kedro is one of them. One of the oldest. It's almost 7 years old now. And yeah, we developed it internally to start with for our own colleagues to help those data scientists get better at building pipelines fast and of good quality. And when I joined Quantum Black, Kedro was like in its infancy. So we had the shapings of a product, and then people were getting more and more excited to use it. And that's when there was this idea of let's try and go open source. Let's actually share this with the world so more people can benefit from it, but we can also get more feedback and develop it in a better way. And I joined the project about a year after it went open source. And for me personally, I'd never really contributed to open source that much. I've used a lot of open source projects, but it always felt a little bit like far to go and contribute to something that I didn't know that well. And it was also a little bit scary. I don't know. I wasn't ready. But then in this way, I could basically work on an open source project from the inside. So it was a very exciting prospect when there was a space for an engineer. I was very happy.
You're like,
to join the team. Yeah, exactly. Because it's such a unique place to be in a proper company and be able to work on open source. Because of course, most of the time people do it in their spare time. It's like passion projects. And while I'm really amazed that people do it, and I think it's great. But of course, it's also hard to sometimes keep it going and support a growing community as well. Because what we find is that our code is part of our job, of course, but it's also interacting with the community, engaging with people and taking in feedback and finding a way on like shaping your vision as well. Because like, of course you get questions about bugs or things not working, but they're fairly easy to address. Like what's really hard are questions about why doesn't Kedro do XYZ, or I want this feature, can you add it? And, sometimes it's just, yes, okay, we will. But a lot of the times it's thinking about how does it fit with the project and Do we have capacity to do this right now? So it's also, you need to be very aligned as a team and have a clear vision to be able to answer these questions in a good way and not just say yes or no and not elaborate.
No, it's understandable. I'm usually one of the people that asks you those kind of questions, like, "Hey, I noticed something. Could you add this?" Or, but usually what sometimes happens is you end up breaking it accidentally. I wanted to ask also what are key challenges, but I think we really covered it well here. What I was also curious about actually here is, so you work in the Quantum Black Labs, which focuses on innovative AI technologies. Like, what are exciting projects that you're currently working on?
So for me, it's always within the realm of Kedro. But I think the most exciting
It's your
thing, yeah, it's my world. I think the most exciting here is well, within Kedro itself is we're focusing on getting to a stable version. We're still a 0 point version. We want to get out of that and get a stable version. But at the same time, we've got some other open source projects happening in labs. One of them is Visro, which is a visualization tool. And what I love about it is how it's really changed the way that you can do visuals very beautifully without needing a lot of skills on visualizing graphs and data. And they're also experimenting with Gen AI, obviously. It's like when you just type
usual.
the usual, I know, but they're allowing you to create dashboards by just using human language. And I think in general, like we're getting close to experimenting more and more with what can our tools do with Gen AI. And this is something where with Kedro, we're still contemplating a little bit
Mm-hmm.
because our users they're not necessarily asking for it yet, but it's more in the curiosity realm of like, oh, could there be a good use case where we can use it? And I think within labs, we are starting to push the boundaries now of like where can we go? Like, and how can we also combine the different tools that we have? But also, I think the hard part is that not everything is open source. So some of our projects can grow in very different ways. And obviously, sometimes money helps. But I'm mostly excited about,
Always a good motivator.
yeah, yeah. But I think the open source is still cool. And I think that's also where, of course, now with Gen AI, with the DeepSeek models and stuff, we are seeing that there is definitely possibility to keep this in the public space. And I think that's where we'll see the most creativity in the end. Because, yeah, it's nice that the big players can do it and they have a lot of money. But I think what I've really valued with Kedro is community in the sense that the individual users, so not the CEO with the first, but the individual data scientists, they have such interesting ideas. And those are for me also the most interesting to kind of solve, like to solve their problems.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, where we'll also see the more interesting use cases of AI and Gen AI, because while chatbots are super handy and they're cool, they're still on the surface. I think
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to see a little bit more what we can do with AI that's not so obvious. And I think we need to kind of get through the basic use cases to open up that layer of real creativity and unlock something we cannot imagine right now.
No, and which from what I see, most use cases right now are revolving around like how can we improve making funny videos or how can we make pretty images.
Yeah.
It's interesting, but it's not practical. And also when it comes to like sustainability, you really start thinking, okay, do I really need to write this prompt or could I just Google it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also about like this is about generating stuff. It's not necessarily solving things. Like, I don't know, detecting cancer, that's not generating something. It's something completely different. And I think that's, we'll probably get to that again in the type of problems that you cannot solve by generating content, which I think at the end of the day is probably for me, like who also I want to understand how it works under the hood. I find those things more interesting than, yeah, now I've, created this prompt and I get an answer.
Yeah, I've now, for example, I'm currently practicing like with the AI agents that Replit released in OpenAI, so the research agents, to see like I get this answer super quickly, but like how did it find the answer? which makes me also wonder, okay, if this is possible, how would that look in the toolbox, for example, like Kedro?
Mm, yeah. I think, we've been brainstorming about different things because I think there's the first question is, could we make it easier to create like a pipeline where you're prompting an LLM with Kedro? So the structure of actually doing it, which is, of course, more of the nature of a company that wants its own flow, where they're, I don't know, querying their own internal bot or something else. But I think the other maybe interesting idea would be, can we generate Kedro pipelines with Gen AI? And I think, of course, the answer is yes, we can do this. But then I think the question becomes, who is that user? Because for a very long time, we focused on a person who's still writing code. And while I do believe that if you know how to write code, you can prompt a lot better, so your outcome will be a lot better. With this, we could, of course, also go into the realm of maybe someone who doesn't know so well, and we can generate something for them that does the job a lot better than if they'd had to write it from scratch. And one of the key criticisms on Kedro is also the learning curve. Because what we find is that not everyone has the same background. And when people come to Kedro, sometimes they feel like it's too much. They need to know Python. Ideally, they need to be able to work with an IDE comfortably, use Git and do testing, like all these things that as a software engineer is like, yeah, that's what you need to do a job. That's maybe not necessarily what a data scientist thinks. They use notebooks primarily, maybe, yeah, they know Python, but that's kind of it. All the other stuff is a lot. So the perception is that when you really use Kedro to its full benefit, there's more to know than just Python and Kedro. And I do think that's where a generative version of Kedro could help maybe get people up to speed, because it can create these concepts and with that teach people why you would do it that way.
Well, I'm thinking immediately of cursor.ai, which lets you generate an app just by prompting like, hey, I want it to be something like this. I'm getting those kind of vibes. Oh, looking forward to that. You guys will add that as a feature. So I will definitely be watching GitHub for any updates. But besides Kedro, I also would love to talk about your technical expertise, because I saw you've worked with diverse technologies like Scala, Python, Java, AWS, and Spark. But how do you approach learning and mastering these different program languages and tools for our young listeners?
Yeah, very good question. I think the reason why I've learned these things were always because I had to use it in a way. I think for me, the best way to really learn tools is by using them, not just in a theoretical way and only reading or only toy examples. So all of the languages I learned were because at the places I worked, they used either Java, Scala, or Python. But with languages, I think once you have mastered one, learning another is getting easier, and then the third is even easier, etc. Because there's so many concepts that are the same, right? Like things like a for loop or integer strings. These things, the first time you hear about them, they're super foreign concepts, but versions of that exist in pretty much any language I have tried using. So it becomes easier. But of course, the more you use it, just like with human language, the more natural it becomes. And so I do find when I'm learning something, even if it's more for a personal project, having a goal, what you want to build with that language, is the best way to learn it. So if you want to learn JavaScript, go build something in JavaScript, because just reading about it, I find too plain. And that's similar with other technologies. Like I used AWS a lot in my first job and got super familiar with it. Now I would have to relearn a bit, but there's concepts also with these platforms that are universal. And so using them, you will get to know things like, I don't know, instances and scaling and cloud storage and things like that. So my practical advice for younger listeners is always do something with the thing you want to learn, because that's when you really get to know language. It's not just the example things in a book where, of course, they've made the example to work. It's more when you try to build something that doesn't exist yet, when you get into like weird realms of languages, because I find also debugging is horrible, but it's a great way to learn because, you get
It's
to learn the
my
errors.
favorite task. Let's keep it at that.
Yeah. And obviously nowadays you can use Copilot and stuff like that to help you. I do think it's a great way to like ask about like, why does this work this way? Why, like, I think that's another tip. Maybe always be curious and ask like, why does it work this way? It's so tempting when you do an online course to just copy and execute and then just, oh yeah, no error, it's fine. But obviously the best way to learn is to question why did it work or why didn't it work and go from there and then, yeah, build your own stuff because that's also the most fun.
Yeah. So your tip is find an idea, find the language that fits it, and then just start coding.
Yeah.
See how it goes.
And sometimes maybe pick a language just because you want to learn it, not because it's the best. So I recently, well, I've had a
I
personal
think that's a
website.
dangerous question just in general. What's the best programming like?
Yeah. If you go down that rabbit hole, you'll find all sorts of opposing views. But yeah, a personal example I have is when I was learning Python and like I was learning my HTML, CSS, I decided to build my own website for me, personal website. And it was the best way to kind of get started because I had this goal and I knew what I wanted it to look like. And yeah, I just started building it. And over the years, I've iterated. And at first, I wanted to do a blog, and then I didn't have time to write stuff for the blog anymore. And I've recently revamped it to be like a restaurant guide because I like going out for dinner. So I thought, this is a great way to save my own favorite restaurants and to share them with other people. And I built it in TypeScript and this framework called Astro, just because out of curiosity. It turns out it wasn't that great. And a lot of people on Reddit have opinions where I was like, I should have read this before I did it. But it works, and it was fun to fiddle around with something completely new. So I think it's also what I love about coding is there's so much you can do, and it really is creative. So sometimes maybe the thing you want to build, you could do it more efficiently, you could do it in a prettier way, but do it your way, and you also learn what you like. And I end up building a lot in Python because that's where I feel most familiar and most comfortable. But that's why this time I was like, no Python backend. I'm going to go with something completely different because otherwise I never go outside of that and never learn something completely different.
Would you also say this is your most significant learning experience in your career so far, or?
Yes, absolutely. I think that, and also the fact that you're never done learning. Like when I was a junior engineer, I always had this idea in my head of what it meant to be senior or be a tech lead or, be this super cool person.
You're super cool.
That's very sweet. But yeah, I had this idea that that person would be the person who knew everything. Like you would go to them and they'd be like, this is how you solve this problem. And I know exactly how to do this type of architecture. But then the more I learned, I also realized they don't know all these things. And that's completely fine. I think the more you learn and the more you experience, you actually find that it's the hardest thing is to be comfortable with not knowing stuff, but knowing that you can somehow find a solution to it. Because like a lot of the times the problems that come in front of me, I have no idea what the answer is, but I do know that I have the experience to find the answer in a way to, reach out to the right people sometimes, or ask the right questions, or even just, fiddle around until you have more ideas. Because at the end, yeah, I think the biggest skill to have is problem solving, and the languages and the tools, they're there to phrase that problem in a way. But when you start, they're just tools, right? The real skill is just being able to navigate the unknown and feel okay. And I think as a junior, I was just like, every time I didn't know anything, I felt silly or like ashamed and I didn't want to ask. And now I'm like, no, it's not like they know everything.
Question.
Yeah, exactly.
What I also when I interview other people, I also often they tell me that when it comes to like balancing like their technical skills with leadership responsibilities is really hard because you kind of like end up going into management and you kind of like
Mm.
lose the everyday coding possibility. How do you balance that as a principal engineer yourself?
So I'm quite lucky that I'm not officially a manager, so I don't have any
Yay.
official responsibility. Yeah, I think that helps. So I don't have to do any like official management or bureaucratic processes. So any one-on-ones I do are all because I want to do them. And I try to use them also to talk about technical things where possible. And I am still very much hands-on. I've actually recently read a lot about technical leadership and the role of a tech lead. And I came to the conclusion that staying technical is also part of your role. So if you're diving into hands-on coding, it's not like you're doing something you're not supposed to, even if like some organizations make you feel that way, right? They will make you feel like I have to only do management. And I've really, like the one thing I have stopped doing is the type of like super easy tickets that, you know, anyone could do in the team.
Mm-hmm.
Or things that are really important because if I don't have time for it or it just is really hard and I'm just blocking the whole team, that's completely useless. And also my work is harder to review because yeah, I think at the end of the day as a tech lead, you should make sure how do I unblock my team. My value is mostly in coaching my team and reviewing their works. I think that's of course somewhat less fun than writing the code yourself, but you can still be super technical because, you know, you can check out those PRs, you can actually work with the code and see, can you do it better? And then I find tasks that I can do hands-on that aren't a super high priority. So if I don't finish it within a week, it's completely fine. But I still get to do the things of like the fun hands-on coding. But I think it will always be a challenge. But yeah, the one thing I realized is that the hands-on stuff, it's part of the job. And it's really helped me being able to also defend that and not feel like, oh, I'm not spending enough time managing. This is meaningful. Yeah.
That's so nice to hear that you still get to review and learn and also coach your people so well, and that you still get to interact every day with it. Because I hear a lot of people like kind of lose that, but that's
Yeah.
awesome.
I will protect it with my life for a very long time, I think. Yeah, because I always feel like, I mean, I don't want to be an individual contributor again, but if at some point it would be that or managing, I'll be an IC because managing, you know, I love working with people and I love coaching my team. But I think when it becomes a very official role and it consumes all your time, I probably wouldn't be as happy as I am now.
Your heart is really with coding. Amazing. Would you also, because we are slowly running out of time, so I'm going to move to the last questions. Because given your vast experience in AI and machine learning, like what emerging trends do you find like most exciting when you're looking at the future of AI and machine learning?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be Gen AI. I don't think I could have said anything else, but I think in all seriousness, I do think it's an exciting technology. And I think one where technical people can actually really get to really cool creative things. Because when I look at my job, coding is part of it, but there's so much else where I feel like how great will it be if we do have agents that can monitor my CI and then trigger a build again and just make sure that that gets through if it's a flaky build and then maybe even open a PR to do that. It's things like that where I feel like we have already automated a lot, like, yeah, continuous integration, continuous deployment. It's so different from when I started my career, and that's only like 9 years ago. Now with this, I think we can get even further, much faster. And while, of course, there will be a time that we need to get used to, yeah, having this technology by our side and maybe it taking over part of what we are used to doing, it will also give us time for things that AI cannot do. Like we as humans still, of course, have a unique twist. And I think especially as technical experts, there is we are still very much needed also in setting up these technologies and prompting them in the right way. But I think with any type of automation that we've seen in history, at some point you get to a level where all the obvious stuff is replaced now by machines. And that's when we get a lot more free time and we get into the space where problems are really hard and we need humans to solve them. And I think it's also going to be very fun to, yeah, I think especially if you're not maybe part of a bigger team and working alone, an AI can now really enable you to build things that you before wouldn't have been able to, because now you have someone to talk to and like pair program with. So I do think it will level the playing fields a bit more, like it will make it more equal for people who have maybe before had less access to the right mentorship, etc. And then I'm also excited to see when the dust has settled throughout everything generative to focus more on like what we now suddenly call traditional AI, but the problems that cannot be solved by generating stuff. And I think that's where the real power lies. And, you know, I mentioned it before, things like cancer detection is one of those. But I think there's a lot more also with humanitarian help and things where I think maybe because there were so many urgent things or tasks we had to do that can hopefully soon be automated, we can start focusing on the things that maybe weren't as important yet because we didn't have time for it. So that's kind of how I look at it.
And do you also see, so maybe I can end it with this question. So how do you see then the frameworks like Kedro shaping the future of data science and machine learning on this aspect?
Yeah, I think we're a little bit of in an existential moment where we do need to think about what it means for Kedro to be sustainable in the future. But I do still see a purpose with like traditional software, because even though all of this is going very fast, we as humans need to be able to maintain the systems that we are creating, whether it's us doing the creation or the Gen AI. So I do think there is a role for Kedro and other platforms to embed that structure and embed the robustness and make sure that people will feel comfortable with these systems coming in and being able to use them still. And I think there's also, an interesting, bright future for people working in this space and creating those pipelines and deciding what the new best practices should be. So I think that's also where there's an opportunity to shape this.
Thanks so much for sharing your insights and also telling us more about Kedro, about you, Merel. You have a very impressive career, so I would definitely say to my listeners, go check her out on LinkedIn. I guess also if people have questions about Kedro, they can send you a message.
Absolutely.
Or contact you on GitHub. I will post the links on LinkedIn so everybody can also check out the Kedro Toolbox. Thank you for listening in. Thank you for doing this interview with me. This was AI Insights for this week, and see you guys next time.
Thank you so much for having me, Fleur, and thanks for listening.